Hey, what's up, everyone? So hopefully you guys had a good spring break. Hopefully it wasn't too cold because I know these last couple days were pretty cold as well. And then we had a bad storm yesterday too. So yeah, it's been rough. But especially for those people who went out of town too. Hopefully you guys had a good time going out of town. I don't know if everyone, or I don't know if spring breakers are going to Florida or not. What the heck are you doing? Move your butt. And so I know that there's a bunch of issues with the airports and stuff like that. I don't know what that's all about and everything. But hopefully you guys went to wherever you guys wanted to go, and hopefully you guys weren't all stuck at the airports and stuff with like TSA and I guess that whole thing. And I think now what ICE is going to be coming into helping out TSA at the airports as well. So yeah, there's a lot of changes and everything. So hopefully everyone hopefully everyone enjoyed everything. I was so busy this whole entire week with like clinicals and school and work and everything. You did a lot of cardiac stuff. So we have our cardiac exam actually in a couple of days, and so I've just been going over 12 leads and how to read them, and you know, what was it, MIs or heart attacks and blockages and stuff like that. And so I've been at the hospital dealing with that a lot. And so I actually printed off a couple things for you guys, which were pretty sick actually. So this guy, he actually came in unresponsive, and he ended up actually converting. And so they found him unconscious but breathing, and then they ended up shocking him, and then because they actually felt a pulse, and then they got something back. And so then this is actually what they got. And so down below, you'll see these basically VTAC, but if you look right up here, kind of like there's two little points, and so that's indicative of a blockage of some sort. Since it's facing upwards, then you can tell that it is a right bundle branch block. And so especially, actually, I got the thing right here, and so here's his whole 12 lead actually. So there's that. And so you would see that all of these are facing down. So that's left ventricular hypertrophy. So basically the left side of the heart is actually beating more versus the right side. So the right side, there's a blockage somewhere. And so that's why it is. And so the, what was it? So the SA and the AV node. So those are small little points that send electrical activity throughout the whole heart. And so those are in the atrium, or in the atria, especially the right one. And so when that is blocked, when the electrical conduction is blocked, so that's when the electrical signals kind of go haywire. So the right side of it is blocked, but the left side is not. So that's why the ventricles in the left side are actually able to pump blood, but the right side, something's going wrong. And so that's what we got there. And so that was really cool. And then another one was this one lady who was having an aortic aneurysm, dissecting aortic aneurysm. And so basically what happens is that there's an aorta that runs through the middle of your chest essentially, and when it starts to shed layers off of that vessel or of the aorta, then you start to bleed into the I think the pericardium or something like that. Basically, it's just a sac around the heart, and it starts to bleed into that. And basically, you start to feel chest pain, but then also pain in your back. And so this lady was feeling that, and so she came in not feeling any pain at all, but she looked like crap. She looked whiter than a ghost. And then she told the nurse that, hey, my stomach hurts. And then I was like, okay, cool. So now her stomach hurts. All right. But then we're like, anywhere else? And she's like, oh, wait, no, now my back hurts. And then that's when we got her scanned, and then we found out that she did have an aorta that shedded its first layer. So we're like, we got to fly her out now. And so essentially when I did the EKG on her, we found this. And so you would see it's pretty consistent over on this side. But then once you go into the middle, that's when you get a much more rapid heart rate. So that's when her heart was like, okay, we're working, but then it started shedding layers, and then we're like, oh shoot, we gotta work even harder. And so there we go. But yeah, basically it's just been just working on cardiac stuff a lot. And so I know I got your midterms that I got a grade, so I'll be doing that. But otherwise, yeah, that's pretty much it. I know I had one other one, but essentially there was one woman who came in with SVT. So basically, it's just what was it? A rapid. So basically, above the ventricles, you have a rapid electrical conduction. It's a loop, and it just keeps going. And so that's what she was in. And so we ended up pushing, what was it, 6 milligrams of adenosine. So basically it slows down the AV node, the conduction there. So it slows down your heart rate. And what it actually did was it slowed down her heart rate, but then it stopped it and then slowly started to restart. But she started to feel kind of like this feeling of when she there was a bunch of weight on her. And so she started to panic. And so then you get these kind of like PVCs or premature ventricular contractions, and so it's just all over the place. But basically, it went back to a sinus rhythm or regular rhythm. But yeah, no, it was pretty cool to see that conversion and see her actually stabilize. And so I've been doing a lot of that. But no, it's been pretty fun. I digress, though. I'm gonna get into it. And so we did leave off with the ending of World War II. Congratulations, guys. We all survived the war. But there's a lot to be said with that. So now we're in a whole new era of the world. And so when the war ends, we're all aware of the Trinity tests. And so, which is basically the Manhattan Project where they tested the atomic bomb. So now with this brand new atomic bomb, we started testing it with we started doing military testing of the bomb, and so we figured out that up to 200 miles away, you can actually feel heat, which is crazy. So we started doing these tests with nuclear reaction, with nuclear reaction and testing the atomic bomb and everything. That's in the U.S. And apart from that, which I did not talk about too much, which I do have a PowerPoint. I found the USB for that, so I will upload the PowerPoint for that as well. But basically, the Tuskegee Airmen, I do need to talk about that. And so it's not commonly known that half of them actually got pulled into the war, and then, I want to say a bunch, I think it's like 350 of them ended up actually going overseas, but only 150, about like half, basically, a little bit less than half, actually ended up becoming casualties. So it's a large amount of them ended up not making it back. But they made a big contribution to the war, especially the 99th or 332nd Division. And I can't remember the statistics, but basically they pretty much never lost a single bomber doing long distance escorts of the B-17s went into Europe. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then essentially this is a whole new world. And so I know with Vietnam, and then that was under the French colonial rule. But then there was a rebel group in Vietnam that started to kind of grow. And it was under Ho Vi Minh. So the Ho Vi Minh combat. So basically, they were under there, and then the Japanese and the French troops, they started to was it Vietnam man-made? So the Vietnam, what was it? Ho Vi Minh. So they started to make Hanoi the center of their government, and they took it over, and then that was a joint group of Japanese and French troops together. Japan was under martial law through MacArthur, and so Japan was essentially becoming or rebuilding back to what it previously was. But under that, they had some territory, or they had allies under France, and so they were able to help France with this rebel group and then capture Hanoi as their center of provisional government. North Korea. North Korea was now under Soviet and U.S. control. And then Manchuria was returned back to Russia, and then Germany was split between the U.S. and British, and then the French and Soviet Union. And so so over here, let's see, and so there's Germany, and so over here is the British to the north, and then U.S. to in kind of in the middle, and the French and the France, down there. But then the Russians also had the Eastern Bloc, so that's what it would be, the Western and Eastern Bloc essentially. And so there's that, and then by 46, this is just 1 year. The U.S. tested 6 bombs, 6 nuclear bombs, and this was under Operation Crossroads. So Operation Crossroads is on Bikini Atoll. So it was like a surplus of captured ships that they put into. It's a very famous video of this nuclear test that was in the water, where they basically had a bunch of captured ships and decommissioned service ships, just all anchored at this test site. And so it went off, and then they recorded the impact and recorded the damage of the ships, and they basically used this as testing ground to figure out whether ships can sustain this damage, or ships can they can actually conduct war operations amidst the explosion of a nuclear bomb. I can't remember the term right now because I'm kind of tired. And so all these tests were done under the basically the Fat Man configuration. So it was an MK3A bomb, and so these were basically the first atomic bombs ever built, and so they used that as the basis for the rest of their designs. And so during all these tests, they had water columns reach around like 10,000 feet high. They were enormous. And so with 1 million tons of water, they fell on all these ships. About 70 or so ships were anchored there, and they fell on all of that. And so it created tidal waves about 100 feet high, and then these waves just kept going about 3 or 4 miles out. And so it was insane. They had condensation clouds shoot down about 60 miles per hour. And then this also caused so much damage to the rest of these ships as well. By 47, the U.S. Army Air Corps now becomes the Air Force, and then also by 47 as well, I believe that's when African American pilots can now be integrated into the Air Force. I believe. Don't quote me on that. So under the Truman Doctrine speech, the U.S. will then provide political, military, and economic assistance to all democratic nations. And then this was all under anyone who is under threat from authoritarian regimes will have the backing of the U.S. essentially. And so all this was conducted, and it was signed, of course, on board his plane, the Independence, that which is at the Air Force Museum, the VC-121, I want to believe, if you want to look it up. So then, as well, we got the Marshall Plan. And so, like I said before, under martial law, Japan is under this martial law by MacArthur, but also the Marshall Plan is the fact that America will give $17 billion in foreign aid to rebuild Asia, and as well as Europe. And so, with that being said, Japan is being rebuilt, Europe is being rebuilt, but Japan is under the protection and direction of MacArthur as well. And so, amongst all this, the following year we got Operation Sandstone, which is another nuclear test in Innuit Atoll. So then we got the Berlin airlift. And so I'm just jumping back and forth because in the midst of all this stuff is going on, we're also conducting nuclear tests back home on the mainland. And so, which I'm going to run through it. So, from 1951, we got Operation Ranger, Buster, Jangle, Tumbler, Snapper, and then Nevada. And then Operation Greenhouse was also Anahuac Atoll. But then 52, we got Operation Ivy, which is also, again, Anahuac Atoll. And so, I'm going to write this all down. I wish I had the, I guess somewhere to put this whiteboard up, which I don't. Well, hello, little buddy. So my cat's laying down next to the computer. But, so Anahuac Atoll. So that was going to be a site of a few other tests there. So, Nope. Anahuac Atoll. So that'll be in 48, 51, 52. Cool. There you go. And so that's going to be essentially where all of those tests are going to be conducted. And where is my... I don't know. Lost my eraser. Well, found it. There we go. Alright. So then, by 53, we got Operation Upshot Note Hole, or something like that. So that was also, of course, Nevada. And so that was in 53, I want to say. And so, what was I going to say? 48. So 48, June of 48, we got the Berlin airlift. And so we know that people on the Eastern Bloc are starving. And so Russia's kind of, taking advantage of these German civilians, and they're making sure that they pay for what they did to the Russians way back in Operation Barbarossa and throughout the whole war. With millions of dead people, Russians are pissed. And so they are starving these people, putting them in jail, beating them, stuff like that. So during the Berlin airlift, we got allies who are sending supplies by C-47s and carrier planes, and so we're sending them over to the Eastern Bloc, dropping supplies and turning back home. And so the Berlin airlift was to aid the civilians and then help them out with like supplies and stuff like that. But at the same time, the U.S. or the Allies were not allowed over in the Eastern Bloc territory. So that's when we get Russian aggression towards the Western Allies. And so by 49, NATO is formed with like 11 other countries into the North Atlantic. So then, they conduct the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. So that is NATO. And so by doing this, that was a way to prevent communist expansion. And so... Take treaty. Organization. So there you go. Yep, there you go. So that was in 49, April of 49, and then the Soviets by 49, they catch wind of so they had spies that were at the Manhattan Project, the Trinity Test, Manhattan Project, of course, and they had spies constantly going back and forth between the U.S. and Russia to gather info on our tests, and by doing so, by 49, the Soviets then conduct the first atomic bomb test in Kazakhstan. So the playing field has now been leveled, and this is what I'm going to get to now. With the 50s, America is at the summit of the world, basically, and Winston Churchill quoted that. Basically, markets rise by like 40%, and jobs are abundant, the family income rate goes up, the American dream is essentially conducted, where it's like the American dream is like that white picket fence, the fresh cut grass, beautiful family, and a dog, and a lemonade is being made, and the best and newest cars everywhere, like the nuclear family. That's what it is called. And so, clear family equals there you go. So yeah, the nuclear family now equals the American dream. Everyone wants the newest and best invention. Everyone wants a perfect life. They want money. They want fame. They want the cars. They want the family, the dog, and everything. And so they just want to have a very calm and straightforward life. Well, that's not always the case, because this is still a patriarchal society. Women don't have as much say so in these matters as well. So they have some rights as well, but not a lot. So, with that being said, this person quoted Betty Friedan. So Betty Friedan, I'm gonna write her down. Betty Friedan. I want you to remember her as well. I think in a book, 1963. Oh, I just screwed up that. 1963. There we go. So, Betty Friedan, that's how you say her name, and you can look her up. And so she has this book called The Feminist Mystique, I think, where she says that basically femininity starts at home. And so women left the workforce. So when the men returned, women left the workforce. And this is her argument. The women left the workforce to live the family lifestyle. And the suburbs were literally burying the women alive. And so the suburbs, once the women got back home, they started doing these things like, cooking meals, making sure all the grass was cut, making sure when the men came home that the food was cooked, the dishes were done, and everything was in order. Well, because of that, men just oversaturated the workplace, and now women had no place in the workplace because they were stuck at home. They needed a way to get out and do their thing. And that's what her argument was that this idea of the American dream was the men's dream, not the women's dream. And so by 1960, this book, The Feminist Mystique, or of course Betty Friedan, she became the contributor to the feminist movement, essentially. And so by this time as well, we got this suburban rise, and industries grow, families become stationary, suburban population rises, interstate highways, schools become abundant, families grow. And then we got this need for additional housing. And so William Levitt created the Levitt House. Essentially, it's a William Levitt. He created the Levitt House. So these Levitt houses were appealing. They were Levitt House, yeah. So they were appealing. They were, photogenic. They were nice. They were everything everyone wanted, and they were inexpensive and fast to build. So he was able to put up all these houses and make so much sales in such a small period of time that now every single neighborhood you could think of had that same exact model house. So now you get the rise of suburbs. So these suburbs were made up of Levitt houses, which were nice and cheap. So there you go. I can take a look at that real quick. I'm gonna put that right here. So I'm gonna see if tomorrow or something I could see if I can. That might actually work. Like right here, maybe. Yeah, that actually might work. Or put this up higher. Put this down here. Oh, anyway, I digress. So now, because of these rise of suburbs and this stationary lifestyle, men coming back from the war. Now, guess what happens? We got babies. So, by this time, um, we got men who came back from the war. They missed their women, and so 4 million babies ended up being pumped out of them each year until the 60s. Insane. And so this stemmed from like pregnancies during the war and after, as America believed that it was kind of like the golden age of capitalism, where like they can have as many babies and children as they want because they could sustain that. They had so much money. And so the GI Bill as well, they allowed veterans to now live prosperously. And so all this was conducted with white Americans, but not black Americans. And so there's this woman, Linda Brown. She enrolled her children in an all-white school, and she was denied entry on the basis that of race, essentially. But we all thought that this was the American dream, like everyone had the same right to education. Well, not exactly. So she filed a lawsuit challenging the Plessy versus Ferguson ruling of separate but equal. Remember that I talked about earlier. And so this violated the 14th Amendment right, protecting a person's right to equal protection under any state law. Well, Brown versus the Board of Education as well. Under that, the Supreme Court also ruled that segregated schools were unequal, which was the very first victory against Jim Crow. Now, this sparked widespread white American outrage. And so this essentially, I'm going to mark this down. So this versus Board of Education. Segregation in education is wrong, basically. And so this starts so now, because of this Brown Board of Education ruling and that this victory against Jim Crow, this now starts a race war. Because of the widespread outrage, the war on racism now begins. The South signed the Southern Manifesto protecting segregation. KKK groups started springing up across the country everywhere. Rosa Parks, she ends up removed from the front of the bus. And then Martin Luther King Jr., which was a new preacher at the time, a young preacher at the time, he orchestrated a 13-month boycott on public transportation. Thousands of white families removed their children from racially segregated public schools. Then you started hearing about the Little Rock Nine. So that was around like 57, where they allowed for Arkansas High School to be integrated. And so all this was going on at the home front. But now, North Korea started getting kind of spicy. So July 1950, North Korea, under the Soviet support of the South, Soviet support, and then South Korea, under the support of U.S., especially after World War II, the North Koreans wanted to militarily control the South, and so, there we go. So, with North Korea, they end up invading South Korea to unify it under one regime. And so South Korea wanted to defend themselves because they're a republic. They don't want to be part of the communist or the USSR or under their power. And so they defend, and then by doing so, they ended up so the North Vietnamese, they end up invading past the 38th parallel. And so the 38th parallel was this established line between the North and South. By doing so, they now caused the United Nations to intervene. The combined United Nations forces were then aided by the air, ground, and naval forces of the U.S. Under the command of Douglas MacArthur. So Douglas MacArthur comes right in. Now, if anyone had touched or had looked at my thesis on air power and pilot training and everything, I do make note of this. So, going into the 1950s and everything, we had a lot of pilots who were experienced in propeller-driven aircraft. They're slower. It's all mechanical and digital, or it's not. It's all mechanical. They spent years upon years, like almost a decade. Actually, no, actually about like 2 or 3 decades, learning how these aircraft worked. Now they switched to jet aircraft. F-86 Sabres and MiG-15s. And so the MiG-15s were Russian aircraft. The F-86 Sabres were, of course, the U.S. The U.S. used the same kind of swept wing look that the Germans used with their Me-262, and then their Comet. I believe it's the Me-165, I believe. And so because of that, these pilots did not know how to essentially dogfight in these faster jets. And so the MiG-15s were laying waste to them. So now they had to revamp the pilot training and try to figure out how to combat these fighter planes who are now driven by jets, not propellers. I digress though. So the UN, they were forced back into the Pusan, but then MacArthur, he ends up flanking behind the North Korean lines, and so North Korea, they moved back behind the 38th parallel to defend, and then this relieved the UN forces who were up against that line, so they ended up backing away as well. The Chinese came in to help out, but they ended up pushing the UN forces even further back, and so the Yalu River. So the Yalu River was across the 38th parallel. There we go. So this is where they were pushed back behind. And so by 51, China loses momentum after pushing the UN forces that far back. And what was it? So they ended up taking Seoul, then they started losing momentum. And so Seoul, South Korea. And then Matthew B. Ridgway, so remember him as well. He took back Seoul and he marched the communist forces back to the 38th parallel. So between like 51 and 53, the war became essentially a stalemate. No one was moving anywhere. They were fighting, but then no progress was being made. So essentially, we got this tug of war between the UN forces and North Korea, where the UN forces pushed North Korea back, but then the UN forces want to defend that line. The North Koreans want to push into South Korea, push the UN forces out of Korea, but then the UN forces counterattack and then they push them back. So it's just this back and forth. So essentially, the war's a stalemate. Truman gave up on trying to unite the country. He's just like, y'all are a lost cause. Screw it. Y'all can have it. Whatever. So MacArthur challenged Truman, though. He was like, no. We got this. We can take them back. This is a war. I got this. Trust me. And so he challenged Truman's decision publicly. He challenged the freaking president's orders publicly. So, you know what the president did? You know what Truman did? He was like, MacArthur, you're done. So he stripped him of his command. So now MacArthur does not have any power or say so in the matter anymore. And so afterwards, though, Dwight D. Eisenhower, he becomes president. And so he wants to end the war through military and diplomacy and stuff like that. And so dude is like, all right, we got this. The following summer, July 27th, 1953. Remember that as well. The armistice was signed, ending the organized military action and leaving the country divided. So from there on, from 53 till now, there's North Korea and South Korea. 38th parallel is right in the middle. they don't change that. So now, remember what I just said though. An armistice was signed, not a treaty, not a surrender. An armistice, a ceasefire, which means technically this has been the longest ongoing war since, I believe, since I want to say, it's World War II. That was 5 years. Well, U.S. technically, I guess U.S. only war has been that many. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, no, I think it's World War II. That might have been it. Yeah, since World War II. And so, actually, no, since the Iraqi War or the war in the Middle East, it's been, yeah. So that, I believe those two have been the longest. This has been the longest running war essentially, and so, but I digress. That's just kind of a little fun fact for anyone. You don't have to remember that, but yeah. So the MiG-15. So the MiG-15 was kind of like this anomaly. It was fast. It was swift. It was nimble. It was lightweight. It was. It had good weaponry, and also the pilots were great at piloting that aircraft. It knocked down so many of our aircraft. So the U.S. was like, "Yo, we got to get our hands on this plane and figure out what the hell we're doing wrong." So, a MiG-15 deflects to the south just unknowingly. This pilot is named No Kum Sok. So, No Kum Sok. Alright, so that's a U, by the way. Sorry, my U's look like A's. So No Kum Sok, he defected to the UN, United Nations, but he didn't know about this demand. He didn't know that they wanted this plane. He just wanted to get out of the war. So he goes in, he lands at this airport, and he's handed $10,000 cash, and the U.S. is just like, "Yo, hey, so thank you for knowing about our plans to research the plan." And he was like, "What? No, I just wanted out of the war." And so they're like, "Oh, all right." But yeah, this guy actually ended up coming to the Air Force Museum, and they actually have his plane on display, the actual one that defected to the South. And he ended up having like 2 children and a wife. I think he passed in like 2022. He lived pretty long. He actually, and then he met up with his best friend, Kurrchhheeooowwww, and so Kurrchhheeooowwww was his best friend. There we go. So that was his best friend, and so they stayed in touch up until his death in 2022. And so, but Kurrchhheeooowwww, though, but prior to that, he became one of the most powerful men in North Korea. And so, by doing so, though, this war showed Europe that the U.S. is committed to world policing and diplomacy through political and military means, though. So keep in mind that. By 1954, back home, we got Castle Bravo. So Castle Bravo, this was one of the most devastating nuclear tests. So, I might stop after this. Nah, I might keep going, especially if you guys like this. I might keep going. So Castle Bravo was at the Bikini Atoll, and so basically it was like a shrimp test bomb. So this was the first surface hydrogen bomb that was solid fuel, and they said that it was supposed to be predicted like 5 or 6 megatons, and so not much greater than the previous tests that it ended up being. They moved the residents to further islands out just to protect them from the radiation and stuff like that. But they only moved them out so far as to protect them against a 6 megaton bomb, which they understood. But this bomb, when it blew up, how much do you think it was? It was almost triple the amount that they predicted. It was up to 15 megatons. So this was the largest thermonuclear burst ever conducted in the U.S. So this Castle Bravo crater that it created, it literally changed the landscape as we know it. It was about 200 feet deep, this crater was, and it was over a mile wide. It eliminated a whole entire island. This cloud that it had stretched about 18 miles high with a diameter about 60 miles. It was the worst radiological disaster in human history at that point. Second to, what was it? I think it was, what's that one in Europe? Russia. Oh, I'm going to have to look it up again. Where's Ukraine? Oh, okay. It was, jeez. Why am I blanking on it? It's up here. It's up at the border of Belarus, I believe. Oh. Wow. I'm blanking on it. They have a TV show about it, too. Wow. I'm blanking on that name. Wow. Anyway, I'm sure it'll probably come to me, like, later on. But, yeah, so there was a failure to conduct safety measures amongst like the islanders, and the U.S. servicemen actually meant for everyone involved was now subject to that fallout. Naval ships about 30 miles away, they were subject to radiation as well, and so they ended up finding out that all 154 islanders received up to about 175 rad, which is a lot. What was it? The Japanese fisher, I believe, is the fifth lucky dragon. So that was up to about 300 roten, and so that was also a lot, too much radiation, which then created an international uproar and diplomatic crisis between the U.S. and Japan again. And so all of Bikini Atoll was then evacuated, and the exclusion zone was up to about 1% of the Earth's surface area around. It was insane. About 570 square miles, I want to say. And so, now, this was all kind of in the U.S. and everything, but then when you go back to Vietnam at the same time as all this was going on, you also got Vietnam, who was finally liberated from French colonial rule after Ho Chi Minh fought them at Dien Bien Phu. Dien Bien Phu. So here we go. There's that. So Dien Bien Phu. And so this ended the First Indochina War. And then this created the Democratic Republic of Vietnam, or, of course, the DRV, which was then backed by the Soviets. So then again, back in 1955, you got the Warsaw Pact. And so I'm kind of jumping back and forth. My bad. My mind's just going everywhere. So the Warsaw Pact, though, was then signed between Hungary, Bulgaria, Romania, the USSR, and then Poland. This was as a way to protect against NATO and its expansion. It was to create what we now know as the Iron Curtain. So, curtain. Romania, Hungary, USSR, Poland. All right. So you got that. So this Iron Curtain now protected against all Soviet-backed nations against NATO. So now, because of that, they had this line. So this line then separated both the Iron Curtain, or the eastern side of Europe, and then also the Asia, but then also it protected against the western side and all NATO-backed countries at the time. 56 under the Geneva Accords, Vietnam was to be made a republic by election, but it was stalled due to the rising tensions of the West and the USSR. And so, by by this like rising in tensions, or like the rising numbers, so by the rising of these intentions, the U.S. then sends an increasing number of non-combatant military officials to train the Republic of Vietnam, or the RVN. And so this is about like 1956 now. So 1956, I'm going to put this down. 56, U.S. sends basically like liaisons or people to train the RVN. To train RVN. All right. So there you go. 1956, all right? So, yeah, that looks like it's 1956. So 1956, they send them in. So remember that. That's beginning, all right? And so by this time, we also got a whole bunch of other things too, though. So 57 Sputnik. So Sputnik 1 is launched into low orbit by the Soviet Union. And as a way, this was used to broadcast radio waves or radio pulses. We caught wind of that, so now we're like, we have to do this now. And so, in the middle of all this, by 58, we also had finished about 200 nuclear weapon tests due to the due to the information provided of how devastating it is, a moratorium was made on nuclear tests in general. And an agreement was made between Eisenhower and the USSR over the testing of nuclear bombs. Essentially, we need to stop this. We need to back off of this because it's causing more harm than good, essentially. But it's not saying to get rid of it. It's just saying to stop testing. Well, that's just between us two. So then in 1960, we didn't realize that other countries were developing their own bombs. France. 1960, France ends up testing their first atomic bomb in Algeria. Germany in 61 was officially split into the Berlin Wall was built and everything, and into a communist state of Russia and the capitalist state of East Germany, essentially. And so, as we're going along, the USSR, or Soviet Union at the time, they restarted their nuclear test program. So then, because of that, the US was like, all right, bet. So the U.S. starts up their nuclear test program again and tests 2 bombs within a month. And then this keeps going. So 2 bombs after 1 month, 2 bombs again and again and again. Each month they test 2 bombs. They're sending a message to USSR like, okay, you want to start your program? We can start ours. So 64, Gulf of Tonkin issue. Now, I'm going to get to this. 64, Gulf of Tonkin. Now, the North Vietnamese Navy torpedo boat, it supposedly, like, no one really knows, but supposedly it attacked the USS Mado. So this is... There we go. So it attacked these USS ship or the US ship, and then it sinks. And so this allowed the Gulf of Tonkin resolution to pass, and essentially this called for the rapid military action against North Vietnam. This is what the US needed to enter the war and pretty much take over North Vietnam. And so now I'm going to stop there because this whole next issue from the 60s to the 70s is going to be the Vietnam War. And so all this, both political, social, and military aspects are all coming to a foot. Coming to like a culmination of this just complete explosion of death and hatred and diplomacy, assassinations, and stuff like that. And so, I'm going to stop there, but essentially, that's basically it. So with this being said, 64, that's essentially the beginning of what we will call the Vietnam War. But 56 is when we kind of start training people over there in Vietnam. Um, but yeah, that's basically the gist of everything that's been going on. I know there might be a bunch of other things too, but there is just so much that goes on in the 1950s and 60s that essentially I'm going to hold off for now. Especially since we're approaching an hour-long lecture on everything. Yeah, so that's going to be it. Pretty quick and dirty. About 10 years span of just a lot of different changes politically and militarily and then socially. And so, I got a free day tomorrow actually. Tomorrow's my first day off. So tomorrow, because I know a lot of people wanted this. Or not a lot, but a few people wanted this. I'm going to do a bonus lecture on the Waffen SS and also the U.S. liberation of the Holocaust camps. And so I was told by a teacher that if it pertains to the U.S., I can talk about it. Now, I'm sure no one will get too mad if I talk about the European side, but because this is a U.S. history course, I do have to integrate the U.S. into it. So that's why I can talk about the U.S. liberation of the Jewish camps, but I cannot talk about stuff that pertains to like European history in general, or basically. So the U.S. has to be involved somehow. So the Waffen SS will be amongst all that because a lot of people wanted to know about that. Yeah, give me one moment. Actually, I got a couple things actually for you guys. Hold on. So, we have the Ju-87s, which was a dive bomber, a German dive bomber. They used this aircraft a lot during the Spanish Civil War and also into Operation Barbarossa and World War II and stuff like that. Very popular aircraft essentially because of the fact that it used the Jericho sirens. So Jericho sirens were attached to the wheels or landing gear. And so once it entered this dive, that's when you hear that iconic scream, which I can post some videos of it as well. And so they used this in the Eastern Front when they invaded Russia, but a lot of them were also shot down. So I went to the antique store, and there was this one person who was selling or they had a private booth, and they were selling a lot of military antiques. Well, I found this one, and so it's actually wreckage from a Ju-87 right there in the Eastern Front. And so that was really cool to kind of happen upon and see that, and also at the same time found this pin. So it's rifleman pin, and so this right here. So there you go. There's that as well. So this rifleman pin was used as a pin during training. So in Germany, during the beginning of the war, or prior to the beginning of the war, in the mid to late 1930s into the 40s, and so Germany offered these pins for like sharpshooters, snipers, riflemen, if they exceeded in their training. And so at this antique mall, I ended up capturing that or finding that as well. I have a bunch of other military surplus things as well, but those are one of the two that I can show you guys for now. I'm not condoning the what the Nazis did. I'm not condoning what Hitler did. It's just a matter of the World War II history is super fascinating to me, and military history in general is super fascinating to me. So then when I see something that is part of that history, I get really excited about it, and I kind of want to deep dive and find out more about it. So yeah, essentially that's just a couple little trinkets that I ended up finding a long time ago, actually, and I got a whole bunch of different stuff too. I collect money from different countries as well. I have a bunch of that. I collect old photographs. I have a bunch of old photographs from when the P-51 ended up being used in the war and stuff like that. So I got a lot of different stuff. And so next time I'll show you guys, especially because it's supposed to be, I think, it's supposed to rain tomorrow, but I mean, I'll be inside, so I can still show you guys a bunch of different stuff too. But yeah, no, I'm gonna stop talking, start rambling for now. But tomorrow I'll talk about U.S. liberation of Nazi camps and what was it? And then I'll also talk about 1960 to 70. I'll just throw that lecture out just so we can get the ball rolling on everything too. You don't have to listen to everything right then and there. You can save it for throughout the week, because I know you guys are still coming back from spring break, still kind of getting to that mix of things. So I don't want to bombard you and throw everything at you. So I'll do that, and then I'll send that in or upload everything and then post it all up for you guys. I'll send you some videos, and then as well, like I said, just take care, enjoy your weekend. Hopefully you enjoyed your weekend. Enjoy your week, and I will try to get all this stuff done for you guys soon. So take care, guys.